when I had the time. A little less flashy than wartime stuff, but you take what you can get. All right, this is going to be our last stop this evening. I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of the hill, where on your left-hand side you're going to see an old stone building. It's actually quite a large building. It's about 3 stories tall. That stone building is called now the Bytown Museum, and it is a museum about the history of Ottawa and the construction of the canal. However, originally this building was called the Commissariat, and it was built by the British Army when they began building the Rideau Canal. And it was where they kept all their supplies, etc., for canal construction. A lot of money was stored there, soldiers' rations, that sort of thing. It's actually the oldest standing stone building in Ottawa, having been built in 1826. So it's a pretty neat place in itself. Over the years, the museum has developed a bit of a reputation for being haunted. The museum staff and visitors to the museum as well have reported walking through the museum and suddenly hearing heavy footsteps coming behind them. They say if the heavy footsteps start to follow you and you stop, the footsteps will continue for 2 or 3 more steps. And when you turn around to see who's there, there'll be no one behind you. These footsteps have been heard all over the building, but they happen most commonly on the 2nd and the 3rd floor and on the stairs in between. That's not the only strange thing to have happened in this building. For a long time, the museum, as part of one of its exhibits, had a series of TV screens, and you could walk up to one and press a button, and it would turn on and play some music and a little video. But someone had to be standing in front of the TV screen to turn it on. These TV screens, though, seemed to turn on and off all the time, even when no one was in the museum. And it also seemed, of all these little TVs, that the ghost had one in particular that was his favorite. And it played a Canadian folk song that some of you may be familiar with called the Log Driver's Waltz. It used to play on TV a fair bit, I'm told, and it has a cute little animated video that goes along with it. It's also super, super catchy, and it gets stuck in your head, and once it's in your head, you'll never get rid of it. And the staff hated it. But the ghost loved this song, and this video would turn on by itself all the time. Finally, one day, one staff member was there. She'd worked at the museum for 5 years, and she was familiar with the ghost's strange antics. He didn't really scare her anymore. And she was sitting there one day, she was cleaning up for the night, ready to go home, when the Log Driver's Waltz started to play. She was tired, and she didn't want to hear it. So she stood up, and she said out loud, "Turn it off. You know I hate this song." And it stopped, all by itself. So he's not an unfriendly ghost at the old Bytown. We tried to do some research into who the ghost might be, and the name we've come up with is Duncan McNabb. Duncan McNabb worked at the Bytown when it was the Commissariat, and over the years he developed a reputation because sometimes things would go missing inexplicably when he was meant to be watching them. Rations, for example. In one case, a large quantity of rum went missing when Mr. McNabb was meant to be looking after it, and the only explanation he gave was that it had evaporated, which happens all the time in January. So, we think perhaps Mr. McNabb is still up to his old tricks in the old museum. Now, the special thing about the museum is that it's also the site where some of our own staff have had a strange experience recently. A couple of years ago, we had our staff meeting in that building. At the end of the year, we have an annual staff meeting, and it's often in this place. And when the meeting was over, we were all headed back up the hill to go home, when Glenn, who's the director of the Haunted Walks and my boss, Glenn realized that he'd forgotten to set the security alarm on the building. And he had to go back all by himself and set the alarm. Even though Glenn tells ghost stories for a living, he did not want to go into a haunted building all by himself. So he convinced 3 of the guides to come with him, and they headed down the hill with him to the old museum. When they got inside, they thought, well, maybe we'll take a chance to look around at some of the exhibits. So 2 of the guides went up to the 3rd floor, and Glenn and the 3rd guide stayed down in the 2nd, and they were looking around when the 2 on the 2nd floor suddenly heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs from the 3rd floor. So they thought it was their friends up higher up, so they went to check the stairs and found no one on the stairs. So they decided that maybe it was time to leave. So they called down the 2 from the 3rd floor, and they all went down to the exit to get ready to leave the building. And 3 of the guides, they went to stand by the door so they'd be ready to leave quickly once the alarm was ready. And Glenn went over to the alarm panel. To get to the alarm panel, he had to slide across a door, so he slid the door out of the way. He reached for the alarm, and when he did, the door began to shake. Gently at first, and then harder and harder and harder, like someone was beating on the other side of it. And Glenn was terrified and frozen to the spot. And he called out to the other 3 by the door, "Do you see this?" And he turned around to take a look at them, and he saw them running out of the building. So he turned around, he ran right after them. And when they got outside and compared stories, they found that the other 3 hadn't seen the door shake at all. They had been standing by the door ready to exit when they heard footsteps crossing the floor above them and begin to descend the stairs towards them. And that is when they had decided to run. Now, once everybody was outside, the alarm still had not been set. So someone had to be very brave, run back inside, set the alarm super quick, and run back out. And finally then could everybody go home. We are told everyone got home safe, but we are also told that none of them slept particularly well. So this is where I'm going to end my tour this evening. I'd like to thank you very much for coming with me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. We love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to get in touch with us at the Haunted Walks, we're on Twitter, as I said before, we're on Facebook. You can get a hold of us at our website, and we also love to hear TripAdvisor reviews. If TripAdvisor is something you use, for good or ill, we love to hear from you. What we're going to do is, well, what I'm going to do really, is I'm going to head back up to Spark Street now. If you'd like to follow me back up there, you're welcome to do that. If you need directions anywhere else, I'm happy to give them. The easiest way back up to Elgin Street is the main staircase under the War Memorial. There is a staircase over here, but it's really, really steep, and it's probably wet today because it rained. So it might be nicer to take the other stairs, I'll recommend. If you'd rather stay down here, no problem with me at all. I wish you a good evening. Otherwise, thank you all very much.